I love candied ginger. I finally decided to make some at home. It was delicious, and here's my recipe. The first step is to peel some fresh ginger. I take 1 pound of ginger root and I actually go ahead and soak it in a bowl for a bit of time just to kind of make it easier to peel. Once I've allowed it to soak a bit, I take a spoon and go ahead and just kind of scrape off the skin. It comes off pretty easily, which is nice. It's important to peel it because the skin can have a bitter taste. Once I've peeled off all the skin, I go ahead and rinse it off and then prepare to slice the fresh ginger. This is all my clean ginger pieces. I go ahead and prepare to slice them into thin pieces. I'd estimate that I slice it into pieces that are about 1/8 of an inch thick. One thing to be mindful of is you always want to make sure you're slicing across the fibers. Like you can see here, the fibers are sticking out and I'm slicing across them. That's the correct way to slice. You don't want to slice parallel to the fibers. Slicing across fibers like this is correct. You don't want to slice parallel like this. That would be wrong. The reason is when you cut and slice across the fibers, you're going to have very short fibers and that's going to give a nice tender bite. You see all the fibers sticking out here? That's what you want. You don't want to have long fibers because that's going to make it more of like a rough bite. So now I have lots of uncooked ginger coins of various sizes and I'm going to prepare to cook it next. So I go ahead and add all the sliced ginger to a pot like this and then I'm going to go ahead and add 4 cups of water. I'm going to go ahead and allow the ginger to boil some, basically for 30 minutes initially, to allow it to soften. Just another tip is that it's better to do this in a wide pot like this so that all the ginger pieces can spread out. So I go ahead and turn it around and I see some beautiful ginger water at the bottom there. I'm going to remove this softened ginger from the pot now and I'm going to basically set it aside briefly. And then I'm going to definitely keep this ginger water that's inside. In another recipe, I'll show you how I make homemade ginger ale using this ginger water. So it's definitely important to keep this and set it aside. I put it into a bowl. I want to let it cool some before I cover it and store it. So now I take my softened ginger and I add it back to that very same pot. I'm going to use this ginger now as the base to make some simple syrup. So I go ahead and add 2 cups of water, in addition to 3 cups of white granulated sugar. This is a concentrated simple syrup because I'm adding more sugar than water. I basically allow this ginger to cook again for 30 minutes. This helps the simple syrup to develop. I'm sure to stir it very often during this 30-minute process, constantly stirring and stirring. After allowing this simple syrup to develop for 30 minutes, I go ahead and turn down the heat and check on the ginger pieces again. At this point, I see a beautiful ginger syrup has developed. So I make sure the heat is completely off and then I go ahead and start removing the ginger pieces. The ginger syrup that's here is again amazingly flavorful and it can be used to make homemade ginger ale. So it's important to keep it and don't discard it. So I go ahead and take all of the little ginger pieces and then I'm basically going to go ahead and lay it on a rack to dry. But first, a quick reminder to save this ginger simple syrup. I just set it aside on the stove to let it cool a bit. Next, I take a piece of parchment paper and I laid it underneath a rack and I go ahead and spread out all of the little ginger pieces. The parchment paper on the bottom helps catch any of the pieces that fall through to the bottom. Once I've put all the pieces of ginger onto the rack, I go ahead and use my hands to kind of separate out all the pieces to make sure none of them are touching and that all of them have enough space to sit and cool. Once the ginger has been allowed to cool for at least 30 minutes, it should feel sticky but not wet. That's how you know it's ready to coat it inside of the sugar. So I go ahead and dip it in some white granulated sugar just to get a nice coating and then I set it back on the rack to dry. I do this with all the various little pieces. Once you're done coating all the candied ginger pieces with some sugar, you're going to have to let it sit on the rack to dry for several hours. It can be anywhere from 2 to 12 hours depending on the humidity in your environment. But once they're sufficiently dry, they're ready to enjoy. I usually store them inside of an airtight container. I'll take a paper towel and put it in the bottom of the container just to capture any moisture, and then put all of the candied ginger on side. It is important though to make sure that it's completely sufficiently dry before you go ahead and seal it away. I'm putting out this recipe because I felt that a lot of the candied ginger recipes out there are kind of overly complicated. So I hope that this is like a more simple approach to making it. It's the way that I do it and I love it. I won't go so far as to say that it's healthy because I mean we are literally cooking and coating with tons of sugar. But it is at least a nice natural type of candy to eat, which I love. The link for the full written recipe details is found in the description.